My name is Deborah Vale, 34 years old. The wipers hammered a stubborn rhythm against a sheet of rain that swallowed the Virginia highway, and the Navy supply truck shuddered each time a gust tried to shove it sideways. The map on my dash glowed a ghostly blue, the route back to Norfolk Base a thin artery through marsh and darkness. I had been awake for 16 hours and counting. Exhaustion hummed behind my eyes like static, but the cargo was sealed, the orders were plain, no unauthorized stops during classified transport. I repeated it like a prayer I didn't believe in. A flicker cut through the gray hazard lights, far ahead, drowning in the storm. At first I told myself it was a trick of the water, a reflection. Then the shape of an SUV surfaced on the shoulder, hood propped, taillights bleeding red into the rain. My foot hovered over the accelerator, the manual thumping in my head. Keep moving, report at base. But a different voice rose up. Older, salt-stiff, my father's, a retired Navy chief who believed a conscience was part of the uniform. If you follow every rule without thinking, you're just cloth and metal. Thunder stitched the sky. I lifted off the gas. A figure stepped into my beams, both arms raised, rain sleeting off a dark coat. Behind him, through fogged glass, a small face pressed to the back window, fingers drawing frantic half-moons that melted as quickly as they appeared. I eased the truck onto the shoulder, hazards clicking, the storm's roar swallowing the sound of my own breath. When I jumped down, the mud tried to keep my boots. The cold hit hard enough to sting. "Engine's dead," the man shouted over the wind. His voice had a steady ballast, unpanicked, like someone used to giving instructions others followed. Even in the chaos, his posture was composed, a plain gold band on his hand. On the other, a signet ring, old academy style, the crest dulled by years. He gestured back to the SUV. A woman sat in the front seat, turning to shield a child bundled in a blanket. "No signal out here," he added, as if apologizing for the weather itself. "Stay with them," I said, already moving, raincoat slapping my thighs. "I'll check it." The engine compartment breathed out a sour, hot smell. A flashlight beam tore across charred wires and a cracked belt that looked like a blackened snake. It was a dead thing. I closed the hood and the thunder nearly took my balance. "You're not going anywhere tonight," I told him through the open window. "Nearest toe's asleep. Next town is a long way to freeze." "What then?" he asked, keeping his tone even for the child's sake, as though he'd learned long ago that calm was contagious. "I make it not your problem." From the truck's storage, I hauled chains heavy as iron sentences and hooked them to the SUV with hands that had learned to work by feel. He tried to help, and I shook my head. "Sir, consider this a logistics drill," I said, half a joke, half truth. The woman's eyes followed every movement as if counting seconds. The child had stopped drawing shapes in the fog and stared at me like I was a stranger from some inland myth. The tow was slow and careful, a crawl through empty lanes that gleamed like oil under lightning. I gave the man the spare hand mic so he could ride the brake and talk to me through the storm. His voice crackled over the line now and then. "Still with you," and I replied, "Still with me," as if we were repeating a vow neither of us had ever practiced. After 40 minutes, a neon sign for a roadside motel bubbled up through the rain like a miracle no one would write down. I pulled us in, unhooked the chains with shaking fingers, checked the SUV one last time. The office light caught the man's face. Gratitude softened it, but something else moved underneath. Assessment, maybe, like he was cataloging every detail for later. "I don't have cash for all this," he said, opening a wallet already slick with water. "At least the fuel." "Get them warm," I answered. "That'll cover it." He studied me as if committing my name to a place memory couldn't lose. "Lieutenant?" "Deborah Vale." He nodded, and for an instant it felt like we were both on a different kind of deck, some old courtesy passing between sailors past and present. "You've done more than you know." I raised a hand, slid back into the truck, and pulled out. In my rear view, his silhouette stood under the motel's flickering camera dome, the light stuttering like a bad heartbeat. Dawn squeezed pale light over the base gate hours later, puddles turning the asphalt into broken mirrors. The sentry's salute wavered in my peripheral vision. Inside the logistics hangar, fluorescent tubes hummed with the same energy as my nerves. My uniform clung to me. My hair was a lost cause. A folded note waited on my desk. Precise block letters I recognized from a dozen directives. Report to Captain Briggs, 0700. The man had a face carved by a protractor and a desk that looked like it had been squared with a laser. A framed motto behind him: order, duty, precision. Watched me like a panel of judges. He didn't return my salute. He slid a document across the wood, his pen already poised like a small sword. Do you know what this is, Lieutenant? I didn't have to read the title to know. Disobedience of standing order. No civilian interaction during active transport. Yes, sir. You jeopardize cargo integrity and timeline. He spoke as if measuring syllables. There was a family stranded in a Category 2 en route. A child, he said, pen cracking the air as he set it down, does not override Navy protocol. Silence moved between us and sat down. I kept my eyes just past his shoulder, on the framed words, on the ghost of my reflection in the glass. Understood, sir. You're reassigned to base operations. Desk work until further notice. The sentence landed heavier than any chain. Yes, sir. His signature flourished with practiced ease. He handed me the reprimand and looked at me as if daring me to have a feeling about it. When I turned to leave, Lieutenant Miller lounged in the doorway, coffee steam curling up like a smirk. Tough break, Vale, he murmured, low enough that it could be a kindness if you didn't listen too closely. Next time, save the world on your own time. I brushed past him, the paper hot against my palm. The operations office felt like the inside of a refrigerator, rows of screens humming, spreadsheet cells blinking like obedient soldiers. Chief Petty Officer Laram, my new supervisor, was courteous to the point of invisibility. Inventory entries, Lieutenant. Requisitions. Keep your head down. She slid a stack of forms toward me with a neutral smile that said she'd learned to survive inside other people's weather. I settled into a chair that held the ache of 3 previous owners. My hands moved because they knew how to, numbers slotted into boxes, the hum of keys looped into a low tide. Outside the high window, aircraft trundled toward a sky I wasn't allowed to touch. Each evening I ran the perimeter to sand my thoughts down to something dull. The Atlantic air bit hard. Each loop ended at the pier where, years ago, my father had stood with me during a summer storm and said, "It isn't the uniform that makes you honorable, it's the spine you bring inside it." Lightning far out over the water drew that line in the dark again. A week in, the briefing room filled, and I took a seat near the back. Briggs stood at the front with the cool certainty of a man who believed the world rewarded straight edges. He lifted a copy of my reprimand between 2 fingers. "This," he announced, "is what happens when protocol is treated like a suggestion." Several officers shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. Miller didn't look back at me, which told me he wanted to. I kept my face still and the muscle in my jaw from making its own speech. Afterward, I drifted toward the hangar to breathe metal and salt. Chief Morales, hands stained with oil like old maps, fell in step a pace behind me. "Rough morning, ma'am?" He asked it the way you ask someone if the ocean is wet. "You could say that. When I was your age," he said, pulling a cigarette he wouldn't light, "I broke a convoy to pull a kid out of a wreck on I-64. Paperwork ate me alive for a while." He shrugged. "Still sleep just fine." "What happened to the kid?" I asked. "Grew up," Morales said. "Didn't freeze." He tipped a 2-finger salute that meant, "We're done saying the thing we both already know," and drifted away. I stood there with the smell of jet fuel and rain and the thin edge of something like stubbornness catching behind my ribs. Back in ops, afternoon glare flattened the screens to gray. A base runner in a soaked parka hustled through the doorway, clutching a sealed folder against his chest like a lifeguard carrying a child. He scanned the room, eyes landing on me. The label on the tab was heavy black ink, Vale, A. He didn't hand it over. He moved past, quick, toward the administrative wing, vanishing into a corridor that funneled silence. It could have been routine. It could have been nothing. But the hair at the back of my neck rose the way it does when the sky changes and you don't know why. Rules had been followed, boxes checked. The reprimand sat in my top drawer, weighty as a stone in a pocket. Somewhere on a roadside, a motel security camera had stuttered through a storm and caught a stranger in Navy rain gear hooking chains to a dead car. Somewhere else, a pen had drawn a line through my name. I closed my eyes and saw a child's hands against fogged glass, the curve of a signet ring, the way the man's voice had steadied itself for someone else's sake. The wipers in my head kept time. The storm was over. The weather, I suspected, was not. By the time the second week of desk duty bled into the third, I could chart the rhythm of the office without looking up. The hum of fluorescent lights, the rattle of an ancient air vent, the soft percussion of keyboards. It all became the same sound, like a metronome reminding me how far I'd fallen from the storm. My fingers moved automatically over the keys, recording fuel inventory, convoy routes, maintenance requisitions, numbers that said nothing about the people they served. Every entry was another layer of silence. At first, I told myself it was temporary, but the whispers made their rounds faster than paperwork. When Captain Briggs paraded my reprimand at the last briefing, I'd watched how easily one decision turned into a campfire story for the rest of the base. Lieutenant Vale thought compassion outranked command. They said it with laughter, but laughter always hides something sharp underneath. The next morning, the chatter shifted. A convoy of black sedans had rolled through the east gate before dawn. Marines in dress blues stood straighter than usual. Even Briggs was seen polishing his nameplate, something I hadn't thought humanly possible. The rumor had a name before noon. Admiral Warren, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations, was visiting Norfolk for a logistics review. Nobody believed that was the real reason. The air grew heavier as the day dragged on. In the mess hall, conversation slowed when the door opened. At 1400, Chief Morales stopped by my desk, his face unreadable beneath the fluorescent wash. "You hear the news?" he asked. I nodded. "They're saying the Admiral's reviewing our numbers." He snorted softly. "Admirals don't fly across states for spreadsheets, Lieutenant. When the tide pulls back this far, it's to reveal something buried." He left me with that and a half-burned cigarette tucked behind my keyboard. "A superstition for luck," he said once. At 16:30, Captain Briggs called an emergency meeting. The entire division crowded into the operations room. He paced at the front like a conductor before an orchestra that hated the music. "The Admiral will be on base for the next 72 hours, he announced. "I expect full cooperation. All reports, all files, clean, organized, and ready." A few officers exchanged uneasy glances. I could almost hear their thoughts, including the disciplinary records. Briggs continued, his voice precise enough to shave metal. "Remember, this inspection reflects on all of us. One weak link, and the chain breaks." His eyes landed on me for half a beat longer than necessary. The implication didn't need words. When the meeting dispersed, Lieutenant Miller lingered by the back row, stirring sugar into his coffee long after it dissolved. "You think he's coming for you?" he asked, half-smile curling. I closed the binder in front of me. "Why would he?" "Because stories travel up the chain faster than trucks down I-64, he said. "Someone important must have read yours." There was something almost sympathetic in his tone, but envy dressed itself in sympathy all the time. I left without answering. That night, I stayed late. The office emptied by 2,000 hours, leaving only the click of the wall clock and the faint groan of the air conditioning. I was closing a file when I noticed Miller again, his reflection ghosted in the glass wall of records. The light from his monitor spilled across his face. His hands were fast, too fast for inventory work. I didn't move, didn't breathe. He inserted a drive, copied something, pocketed it, and left without noticing me. My reprimand file had been open on that terminal earlier. The next morning, Norfolk Base woke to thunder, not weather this time, but the rhythmic roar of rotors and engines as the Admiral's convoy arrived. I watched from the operations window. 3 black sedans rolled in first, then a pair of armored vans. The Admiral stepped out last, tall, calm, posture that belonged to someone who didn't need to raise his voice to command a fleet. He carried his cap under one arm, silver hair untouched by the wind. "Admiral Warren," Briggs said loudly enough for half the base to hear, practically sprinting from his office. "We're honored, sir. Everything's ready for your review." The Admiral's gaze swept the courtyard, patient and deliberate. "Good," he said, his tone mild. "But I'm not here for numbers, Captain. I'm here for people." That one sentence tilted the air. By 1,000 hours, the Admiral and his aides had set up in the command conference room. Officers filed in and out, handing over reports, saluting, leaving pale and silent. I kept my head down, pretending to focus on data entry, but every hour, whispers crept closer. The Admiral was requesting specific files, performance evaluations, commendations, reprimands. My name surfaced more than once, each time spoken softer. At noon, Chief Morales appeared again, holding 2 mugs of coffee like peace offerings. You look like you're waiting on a storm, he said. Feels like one, I answered. He nodded toward the courtyard where the Admiral's convoy still gleamed under the sun. Storms wash things clean, Vale. Just depends what you're willing to let go of. The comm speaker crackled overhead. Lieutenant Deborah Vale, report to Command Briefing Room 1. The sound pinned me to my seat for a heartbeat. Then I stood. Guess we'll see what gets washed, I murmured. Inside the room, the air was cool, too still. Captain Briggs stood near the head of the long table, a line of senior officers flanking him like decorative swords. At the far end sat Admiral Warren, reading from a folder I knew before he spoke was mine. Briggs straightened. Lieutenant Vale, we're reviewing base operations for procedural discipline. The Admiral requested your case as an example. I saluted, pulse steady but fast beneath the uniform. Yes, sir. The Admiral looked up. His eyes, gray, clear, and unflinching, met mine for a moment longer than formality allowed. Something flickered there, recognition maybe, but I couldn't place it. This report, he said, tapping the file, states you disobeyed standing order during active supply transport. Is that correct? Yes, sir. I stopped to assist civilians stranded during the storm. Before I could finish, Briggs cut in. Admiral, the infraction was clear. She jeopardized classified cargo and violated chain of command authority. The matter has been addressed internally. Warren didn't answer right away. He closed the folder, folding his hands on top of it. His calm had a weight that filled the room. Tell me, Captain, was any cargo lost? Briggs hesitated. No, sir. Was anyone injured? No. The mission ultimately completed? Yes, sir, but... Then the only failure, Warren said softly, was moral judgment. Yours or hers, I'm still deciding which. The silence that followed felt alive. You could hear the hum of the projector, the shuffle of someone's boots under the table. Briggs's face went tight, the color draining beneath his ribbons. Warren stood, slow, deliberate. Captain, when I was a junior officer, my CO taught me something I never forgot. Leadership isn't measured by obedience. It's measured by discernment. He turned to me. You made a difficult call, Lieutenant. You broke a rule to save lives. I swallowed hard. Yes, sir. Would you make the same decision again? I didn't blink. Every time. Something eased behind his expression, the faintest curve that wasn't quite a smile. That's what I thought. Without another word, he gathered the folder and left the room. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that sounded louder than any reprimand I'd ever received. Briggs stood there, frozen. His hand trembled slightly against the edge of the table. No one else spoke. I saluted and walked out, each step feeling like it belonged to someone braver. Outside, sunlight flared across the courtyard, reflecting off puddles left by last night's rain. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel and something cleaner, change. For the first time since the storm, I let myself breathe. Honor doesn't announce itself, it just waits for the truth to catch up. And somewhere behind me, in the sealed quiet of an office lined with glass and precision, Captain Briggs was realizing the truth had finally found him. The following morning, the summons arrived before sunrise. A courier knocked once, left the envelope, and vanished down the corridor. Inside, in clean block print, Lieutenant Deborah Vale. Report to Admiral Warren's quarters, 0900 sharp. I stared at it for a long time. My reflection in the window was caught between dawn and fluorescent light, half shadow, half uniform. By 08:59, I stood outside the Admiral's door, pulse thudding like a metronome. Enter, came the voice, calm and unmistakable. The room smelled of old paper and sea air. Maps covered one wall, photographs of ships on another. Warren stood by the window, sunlight catching the silver in his hair. When he turned, the motion was deliberate, like the tide deciding to change. Lieutenant Vale, he said, thank you for coming. Sir? I saluted, waiting for the reprimand that would end my career more neatly than the last one had begun. He gestured to a chair. At ease. Sit. The invitation unsettled me more than a command would have. I sat, spine straight. He studied me quietly. You've been in service 12 years, he began. Commendations for crisis logistics in Bahrain, NATO humanitarian deployment, 0 disciplinary actions, until 2 weeks ago. Yes, sir. Tell me about that night on Route 58. I hesitated, choosing words with care. A storm, sir. Heavy rain. I saw a stalled vehicle with a man, a woman, and a child inside. Engine dead, no signal. I stopped to help. It violated transport protocol, but leaving them would have been worse. He nodded once. Why did you stop, really? I frowned. Because sometimes doing nothing feels worse than breaking a rule. Silence stretched, filled only by the ticking of a brass clock on his desk. Then he said softly, "That family you helped, the man, the woman, the child, they were mine." My stomach dropped. He turned toward the window, voice low but steady. My daughter and grandson were driving back from D.C. that night. I told them to wait out the storm. They wanted to surprise me for my birthday. A faint smile ghosted across his face, gone as soon as it came. You found them before hypothermia did. I couldn't find words. Only the sound of rain returned in my head, the flash of lightning on a ring, the child's hand on glass. You didn't know who they were, Warren continued, but you stopped anyway. You risked your career for strangers. I've read your captain's report. His tone sharpened. He called your actions reckless. He looked at me, eyes bright with restrained anger. I call it something else. What's that, sir? Leadership. He walked around the desk until he stood beside me. The Navy trains sailors to obey, but obedience without judgment is just automation. You made a choice no regulation could teach. Sir, I didn't expect— I know, he interrupted gently. That's why it matters. Then his expression H. Deborah head. He pressed a button on the intercom. Send in Captain Briggs. My pulse spiked. The door opened a moment later. Briggs entered, stiff-backed, face composed but colorless. His gaze darted from the Admiral to me, confusion flashing once before discipline wiped it away. Sir, if this is about the audit— It is, Warren said, voice even. But not in the way you think. Sit down, Captain. Briggs obeyed, perching at the edge of the chair. 2 weeks ago, Warren said, one of your officers disobeyed a protocol to save 3 lives, one of whom was my daughter. Briggs blinked, the realization flickering like static. Sir, I was unaware. Of course you were, the Admiral cut in. You were too busy writing her reprimand. Briggs straightened. With respect, sir, my actions were within regulation. I know, Warren replied softly. That's the problem. The room seemed to shrink. Warren stepped closer, voice still calm but edged with something sharper than steel. You enforce order, Captain. That's your job. But order without judgment isn't discipline, it's blindness. You've created a culture where fear replaces initiative, where compassion is punished as insubordination. Briggs's jaw clenched. Sir, I was ensuring operational integrity. Integrity? Warren repeated. Tell me, Captain, did your integrity save anyone's life that night? Briggs didn't answer. Enough, Warren said quietly, and the silence afterward carried more force than shouting ever could. As of now, you are relieved of command pending review. You'll report to Fleet Operations in D.C. for reassignment. For a moment, Briggs just stared. Yes, sir, he said finally, voice rough. Warren turned to me. Lieutenant Vale, you are temporarily assigned as Acting Operations Officer until further notice. You'll oversee humanitarian logistics review starting today. The words hung in the air. Sir. He smiled faintly. Consider it restitution. I want your instincts guiding this base. Understood, Admiral. Good, he said. And Vale, thank you. You didn't just save my family. You reminded me what the word honor is supposed to mean. I saluted sharply, every muscle trembling. When I stepped outside, the air hit me like sunlight breaking through storm cloud. Sailors moved across the courtyard, unaware that anything had changed. The flag snapped above them, white and blue against an open sky. That afternoon, I reported back to operations. The same room where I'd been humiliated now felt entirely different. Chief Laram blinked when she saw me. Ma'am? New orders, I said simply, handing her the file. We're beginning a review of procedural doctrine, starting with emergency field discretion. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. About time someone questioned the manual. By evening, word had spread. No one said it outright, but eyes met mine with quiet acknowledgement. Even Miller approached, expression stripped of his usual smirk. Heard the captain's gone, he said. You replacing him? Temporarily, he nodded. Guess that storm paid off after all. It wasn't about payoff. He hesitated, then added, Still, good call, Vale. I'd have driven past. I didn't respond. Sometimes the right words were the ones you didn't say. Later that night, the Admiral summoned me once more, this time to a smaller meeting with Chief Morales present. He handed me a draft document titled Humanitarian Exception Policy. Effective immediately, Warren said. Any officer who stops to render aid during an emergency, if lives are saved, will not be punished for procedural deviation. We're calling it the Samaritan Directive. I scanned the draft. Morales's grin was wide enough to light a hanger. This will go into officer training, Warren continued. Your example will be used to teach judgment, not fear. I shook my head slightly. Sir, that's not necessary. It is, he said, voice soft but final, because someday another young officer will face the same choice. And when they do, I want them to know this institution values conscience over convenience. He paused, looking at Morales. Chief, you've served 30 years. What keeps sailors loyal? Morales didn't hesitate. Respect, sir, not rank. Respect. Exactly, Warren said. That's what this rule is about. He turned back to me. Lieutenant Vale, you'll oversee the first training draft. Make it practical. Make it human. I nodded. I'll do my best. That's why I chose you. When I left his office, twilight had settled over the base. The wind off the bay was cool, the sky streaked gold and violet. Somewhere far beyond the docks, thunder murmured faintly, a reminder that storms never truly end. They just learn to speak more quietly. Inside operations, the framed motto still hung above Briggs's empty desk. Order, duty, precision. I stared at it for a moment, then removed the frame from the wall and leaned it face down on the floor. In its place, I taped a single sheet of paper. Honor is human. For the first time in weeks, I smiled without effort. The storm had taken my command, my certainty, and my sleep. But it had given me something worth far more, the chance to rebuild the rulebook from the inside out. And somewhere, I hoped, the man who once taught me about conscience was watching the sky and smiling too. A year can pass like a single tide when the work is right. By the time the calendar turned, the base that once felt like a cage had become a workshop for something new. Project Samaritan, our humanitarian logistics division, was no longer a memo buried in an admiral's file. It was trucks, convoys, and people. We painted the motto on every vehicle door: order serves people, or it serves nothing. The first time I saw the line stenciled on steel, I felt the weight of it in my throat. The storm still came every spring. Virginia skies always had a taste for drama. The thunder didn't scare me anymore. It sounded like memory calling from far away. But when the Carolinas were struck by the worst hurricane in decades, we were deployed within hours. The convoy rolled out before dawn. I insisted on driving the lead truck. Some habits never fade. Rain smudged the horizon, turning the world to gray watercolor. Behind me, 5 supply vehicles hummed steady through standing water. Halfway to the coast, the radio sputtered. Bridge at mile marker 72 is closed. Structural instability. Do not proceed. Chief Larum's voice crackled through our comms from the second truck. Ma'am, locals are reporting a shelter past that bridge. 200 people. No power. The new directive flickered through my mind like a heartbeat. If lives are at stake, judgment supersedes protocol. For a long moment, I just stared at the flooded road ahead, wipers clawing at the windshield. A rulebook would have told me to wait. But I remembered my father's words, the child's face behind the fogged glass, the admiral's voice. Leadership isn't obedience, it's discernment. Chief, I said quietly, secure cables and distribute weight evenly. We cross one at a time. There was a pause. Understood, Commander. The bridge moaned but held. When the last truck made it across, the radios erupted in cheers. We reached the shelter an hour later, old church walls half-eaten by floodwater, people huddled under candlelight. An elderly woman caught my hand as we unloaded crates. You came when no one else did. Her voice pulled me back to that first storm. As night fell, the rain eased. The convoy's headlights cut across the soaked field like lanterns on a battlefield. Chief Morales stood beside me, sleeves rolled, watching the horizon. That rule of yours, he said, seems to work. I smiled. Wasn't mine, it was the Admiral's. He chuckled. And you think he didn't steal it from you? We shared the kind of laugh that lives longer than fatigue. Weeks later, back in Norfolk, a letter waited on my desk. The handwriting was neat, old-fashioned. The return address, Washington, D.C. Commander Vale, I heard about Project Samaritan. You were right. I was wrong. I spent a career believing leadership meant control. You showed me it means conscience. I've applied for a volunteer post with the Red Cross. Maybe it's time I learn what real logistics is, Gil. Captain Rhett Briggs. I stared at the page until the ink blurred. Not from rain this time. Redemption didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just wrote a letter. 2 months later, Admiral Warren returned for the program's first anniversary. He refused ceremony. No speeches, he said. Just show me the work. We walked the hangar floor together, rows of trucks gleaming under the lights. Sailors moved around us with purpose. young faces carrying the kind of clarity I'd nearly lost once. The Admiral stopped beside a vehicle painted with the blue and yellow Samaritan emblem. His fingers brushed the lettering. "You did this," he said softly. "You took one act of decency and built a doctrine." I shook my head. "You did, sir. I just followed the map." He gave a low laugh. "Maps are useless without someone brave enough to drive the road." We stepped out onto the pier. The bay burned gold under the setting sun. "I sometimes wonder," he said, his voice quieter now, "how many people pass through life never realizing they already made their greatest difference in a single small moment." I looked out over the water. That night, I wasn't thinking about making a difference. I just saw a family who needed help. "And that," he said, "is exactly why it mattered." He reached into his coat and handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photograph, grainy, black and white, taken from a motel security camera during the storm. My truck's headlights flared through the rain, illuminating a figure hooking chains to a stranded SUV. On the back, written in his hand, "For when the storms return, so you remember what courage looks like in the dark." I framed it above my desk. That winter, when another flood struck the Outer Banks, I led the convoy again. The same roads, the same scent of wet pine and diesel. A young lieutenant at my side asked, "Commander, what if command doesn't back us next time?" I smiled. "Then we remind them why they should." He laughed nervously, but I saw understanding bloom in his eyes. "Honor doesn't roar, it whispers. It doesn't demand medals. It waits for the right decision to find it." When we returned, Admiral Warren met us on the tarmac. His salute was sharp, proud, and brief. "Keep your compass true, Commander," he said. "That's all that matters." A year later, he retired quietly, and the responsibility shifted to us, the next sailors in the chain. Some evenings, when the base quiets and the lights shimmer across the harbor, I stand by the railing and think of everyone the storm changed. Briggs, who found his redemption. Morales, who still lights unlit cigarettes. Warren, who proved empathy outranks ego. And the child in the back seat whose face I'll never forget. The night breeze carries the scent of salt and jet fuel. Somewhere behind me, a convoy engine starts, the low hum of purpose returning to the air. I whisper it again, to no one and everyone. A uniform doesn't make you honorable. You make the uniform honorable. And as the stars blur over the dark water, the framed photo in my office catches the light. Truck headlights slicing through rain, frozen forever in silver streaks. One act of mercy, one choice in a storm. That's all it ever takes to change the direction of a chain of command.